Order. We'll move on to agenda item 9F. Oh, I was missing the one person we need for the next agenda item. I counted up here, Director Wasley. I didn't count down there.
Thank you, Chairman. Kind of have a lengthy department activity report. We haven't had a commission meeting in a couple months, so a few things to update you on. First, I kind of want to give you an update on some of the personnel issues or changes. As Patrick mentioned, yesterday was Rich's last day after 35 years, 8.5 months. Rich said he never really did the math on it, but did some math with him this week on it. I think he's been paying about 3% of his salary to work for the last 8.5 months. So sure appreciate him sticking around and helping me with my transition as much as he did. We do have a new chief game warden. I don't know if he came in the room. Oh, there he is by the door, making sure nothing bad happens. Tyler Turnipseed. Tyler will be assuming full duties and responsibilities on Monday as chief game warden. Up until today, Tyler's been field warden out in Winnemucca. Certainly has respect and admiration of his peers. We're really glad to have Tyler. Really excited. Think he's going to hit the ground running. And I also wanted to thank Paul Dankowski for being willing to step in that position and fill in during that interim. So that's a huge position. We're really glad to have it filled and really excited that Tyler stepped up and agreed to do that for us. We also have hired a new game division administrator. We hired Brian Wakeling, who is presently the game branch chief for Arizona Game and Fish. Brian has 25 years experience, has a very impressive resume, has worked on everything from bears to turkeys to lizards to bighorn sheep. He's been the game branch chief for Arizona, I think for somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 years. And Brian will be starting the Monday after Labor Day. So we're glad to have that position filled. I think we have a really good candidate there or appointment there that we're really excited to start making up for some of the lost time the last few months. Predator staff specialist position is currently open. That will close Monday. After being open for a month, we'll evaluate the interest there and determine our course of action. We recently rehired Matt Maples in the Habitat Division. Matt was a fisheries biologist with us for a couple of years. He worked with us through college, stream survey, went right into fisheries. He had a short vacation with Newmont for a couple of years, and now has decided to come back to the state. So we're really excited to have Matt in the Habitat Division. We also promoted Cody McKee. Some of you may know Cody was responsible for the water development program in the South, and Cody has agreed to move up north and take on the responsibilities of kind of populating the scientific database that was referenced earlier. A lot of our caller data, survey data, and Cody has a strong background in database, data management, and GIS, and so Cody will be assuming those responsibilities, I think, around the first part of October. We presently have 8 warden vacancies, and hopefully Tyler can have some success and some luck in doing some recruitment and getting some good qualified wardens to get those positions filled. It's kind of tough anytime you have 8 vacancies in a single division, and certainly this time of year as we're looking at a lot of hunting seasons coming up. From the director's office, just kind of wanted to give you an update on our BDRs. We brought 4 BDRs before you guys. We discussed those BDRs. We were successful in getting all four of those. Three of those were pretty basic housekeeping details. One had to do with vessel number compliance. It was a Coast Guard issue. Another one was electronic federal duck stamp, one where there was language in statute that kind of prohibited us from participating in the federal electronic duck stamp program. Another cleanup one is just some fiscal cleanup, revises provisions governing the funds and accounts of the department. The fourth one, which is kind of substantive for us, is the elk fees. We just had the presentation on the elk incentive tag program and the elk damage payments, and it's a $5 fee, and that $5 fee is described in statute. And as we looked at that and looked at the amount in that account with the drought conditions that we've been facing for the last few years, we saw that there was a very real potential that would be drawn down and not provide us with the opportunity to compensate ranchers or farmers for crop damage, or to build fences to protect it from damage. And this year, because we went to the program where we allowed hunters to apply for both cow and bull tags, we increased the revenue that we generated in that account. But we still realize that in order for the department or in order for the commission to have that authority, the statute would need to be changed. If we wanted to provide the commission the authority to change that $5 fee to something more, and so the proposal is to provide the commission the authority to raise that fee. The language is, I believe, up to $10. There's no intent for us to raise that fee in the short term. We don't think we'll necessarily need to this year, but you saw the graph depicting the number of incentive tags, and we know our elk populations are growing, and we think it's a good idea to provide the commission the authority to be more responsive and raise that fee rather than have to go to the legislature and do that, or do that between sessions. And the BDRs, 412 as of August 12th. There had been 412 BDRs filed. Just a quick listing of some of those that may have relevance to us. Boards and commissions, there was one BDR filed. Relative to energy, 2 BDRs. Firearms and weapons, there's presently 5 BDRs filed. There's 4 law enforcement BDRs. There's a BDR relating to meetings of public bodies. There's a BDR relative to off-highway vehicle registration. 1 BDR regarding public records. 2 BDRs relative to sage grouse. 4 BDRs pertaining to state employees, PERS, and public employees benefit planners. 4 BDRs presently on the books relative to trapping, and 3 specific to water. So certainly as we learn more about those, we'll share those with the commission. Quick run through some department activities by division. Habitat Division, the Bald Mountain Mine EIS, draft EIS should be released at the end of this month or the beginning of next. Fire season has not yet really taken off, but fire rehab coordination has already begun on those fires that have occurred. Monsoonal moisture received in the southern region has precluded the need for emergency water hauls to desert bighorn sheep water developments in the Muddies and Bears. Water development crews are on track to be in full compliance with SB 134, the signing requirements, by October of this year. So there were 1,700 and some odd guzzlers that were required to have a sign that had unique identifier and a telephone number, so that if there was anything observed, whether disrepair or fence damage or anything, that number could be called, or the telephone number could be called, and that specific unique number identifying that guzzler could be referenced, and action could be taken. So far this year, 10 new big game water developments have been constructed in the western region, largely due to cooperation with sportsmen's organizations, NBU, Pershing County Chucker Club. Southern Region is working with NDOT on designing and incorporating wildlife crossing into the planned Boulder City bypass. There's a number of PJ projects that NDOT is partnering with the BLM across the state that are cleared and ready for treatment. I should begin work early this fall on projects in South Steptoe Valley, Combs Creek, and Spruce Mountain. Habitat conservation fee projects work is beginning on the Jigs Reservoir, and I actually have a more specific update from fisheries on that. Let's see, actually from operations. This is fisheries analysis of July quagga mussel samples from South Fork Reservoir. Found a positive PCR hit in 1 of 9 samples. It's by itself not definitive for the presence of live mussels or veligers, but we've taken additional samples from the area where the positive sample was taken, which is Jet Ski Beach, and are waiting for lab results. So obviously that would be significant if we confirmed quaggas in South Fork. We're hopeful that it was a false positive, which is not uncommon. The Southern Region staff did a follow-up investigation of Sunset Park Pond in Las Vegas. There was a YouTube video of an angler that caught a large Asian carp. So we went in there to see if there was any reproduction, and there's no evidence of small carp or reproduction. So we'll continue with the summer catfish plants for now, but we'll monitor the situation and do additional follow-up this fall after the summer stocking program ends. BLM work crews have completed the dredging of Boulder Reservoir in northern Washoe County and started refilling the reservoir. We'll periodically check conditions on the reservoir and expect that we'll be able to restock trout this fall. Fisheries staff has met with the U.S. Forest Service to discuss further options for Incline Lake. NDOW had recommended repair of the dam and refilling of the reservoir for recreational fishing, which was not an alternative in the original NEPA analysis, but the Forest Service has since agreed to consider another alternative to further evaluate repair of the dam. And if that's selected, we'll work with the forest to do that assessment and look at options for public fishing. U.S. EPA has recommended adding Topaz Lake to the list of impaired waters due to mercury levels in fish tissue. It's apparently based on mercury levels in smallmouth bass from samples taken in 2011, which were above the EPA standard but well below the consumption advisory level of 1 part per million. So we'll continue to update you on that. Diversity Division in partnership Washoe County Parks recently closed on the acquisition of 67.5-acre parcel previously owned by Diane Kuhn near Stead to expand the Silver Lake natural area and wetlands. Operations is a division that's actually overseeing the work at Jigs Zanino Reservoir. Construction phase of the dam repair began August 11th and is scheduled to continue through October 1st. On August 10th, we received final approval from the Fish and Wildlife Service for the boating access grant to help finance the project. The grant also funds improvements to the area, including a boat launch facility, parking, restrooms, and day use improvements in the immediate vicinity of the boat launch and ramp. The grant approved per agreement costs allows us to use the money already expended on engineering and design, which is approximately $165,000, as match to the grant. Cave Lake Dam, the engineering evaluation is scheduled to begin this week with a bathymetric survey of the reservoir. There'll be an official kickoff meeting on site August 25th, at which time the operational outlet pipe will be inspected via video camera, and our engineering staff will receive a project schedule for the remaining work. Our aviation, our Air Ops division, our 2 department pilots flew extensive hours in fiscal year 2014, supporting 3 divisions and 21 field biologists on a variety of needs: sage grouse, ungulate surveys, waterfowl, shorebird, raptor inventories, black bear work, guzzler maintenance, etc. In total, we logged almost 1,100 hours in 2 helicopters and a single-engine Cessna. This past fiscal year accounted for the greatest number of agency-flown hours in the past 5 years. The low hour count of 761 hours was flown in 2010, and this year we logged in almost 1,100 hours. This in-house aviation support does not include other contracted aviation support. So we augmented that 1,100 hours with some contract flights as well. Law enforcement boating education program gave away more than 200 life jackets and 50 fire extinguishers in Elko last month. Barrett Gold again provided $5,000 for this ongoing program. NDOW, working with state parks, has set up 14 life jacket loaner stations. As I mentioned, we do have 8 open game warden positions. The division will be conducting a recruitment next month to fill those. Last week, 2 game wardens attended the annual Tri-State Coordination meeting in Utah. At the meeting, several ongoing wildlife cases and investigations were discussed. A number of operations were scheduled that will involve cooperation of wardens from Utah and Arizona. Over the last few weeks, we've had 4 fatalities on the Colorado River. On Lake Mojave, we had 1 drowning at Paiute Cove and 1 drowning south of Willow Beach. Lake Mead, we had 1 drowning at the Boulder Islands and 1 at Sandy Cove. All 4 drownings were from boaters voluntarily leaving the boat to swim without a life jacket. Game wardens will be conducting an operating under the influence checkpoint at Cottonwood Cove on Lake Mojave this Sunday. The incline bear trap tampering case is set for sentencing. It's scheduled for August 20th. Conservation Education Division, Conservation Education and the Fisheries Western Region staff, headquarters staff and volunteers completed a fish salvage operation on the Verdi and Washoe ditches during the first week of August. Over 6,000 fish, I think mostly trout, if not all trout, were removed from the ditches that were being drained early as a result of the drought condition and transplanted to the Truckee River and urban ponds. July completed Bear Logic Month, a public education and outreach campaign designed to teach residents and visitors about the responsibilities of living in bear country. The project included a press release on the governor's proclamation of Bear Logic Month, dedicated bear education page on ndow.org, 5 email blasts reaching over 65,000 people with topics on the governor's proclamation of Bear Logic Month, NDOW's non-lethal bear management tools, securing your trash and reporting unsecured trash, when to contact NDOW with bear issues, and what to do in a bear encounter. 2 radio public service announcements that ran on 5 Northern Nevada radio stations, 4 video public service announcements reaching over 15,000 people, including topics on July is Bear Logic Month, NDOW is the bear expert, NDOW's non-lethal bear management tools, and securing trash. There was also a Bear Logic open house. We had a number of groups, including some HOAs and some Boy Scouts, attend that. Some media outreach to local and regional outlets. We also instituted a new advanced hunter education program in cooperation with the University of Nevada Cooperative Extension and Wolfpack Meats to teach hands-on field dressing and butchering using domestic animals that most closely resembled game animals. The game division, yearling ram and lamb identification presentation was posted on our website. This is in response to our ewe hunt and the concerns over misidentification. So there's about 40 slides with a quiz section at the end to test what they learned from the other slides. There was also an email sent to all spike elk hunters a couple weeks ago reminding them of the spike elk definition and to be patient in viewing all angles of both antlers to ensure no branching. We hired a new data coordinator, previously referenced. That's Cody McKee. They'll be stationed in Reno, and the position will help to facilitate the statewide management, collection, and analysis of all types of data collected by the game division, including GPS collar data, helicopter survey data, and harvest data, among other things. We captured, transported, and released an additional 42 birds during April, Columbian sharp-tailed grouse. There was 27 females and 15 males during the April capture, adding to the 50 birds that were released in 2013. 13 males were observed displaying on a naturally formed lek at the release site. Many were last season's birds. 26 nests were located this season. 16 of them were successful, 8 failed, 2 were active upon the last progress report. 13 broods are currently being monitored, 11 were active, and 2 have failed. There were 9 mortalities documented from this year's release, 7 females and 2 males. However, it's much higher survival rate than last year. Most of the birds continue to remain in the Bull Run Basin, although some have taken up residence in the Marsh Creek Bench area, the north end of the Tuscarora Range near Cornucopia Ridge, and the Wilson Creek Patan Ranch area. Annual migratory bird banding efforts are currently ongoing. Mourning dove banding in the Fallon area has resulted in the capture and marking of just over 600 doves, and duck banding operations that are also ongoing in the Fallon area marshes have resulted in the marking of approximately 500 ducks. Lastly, from the wildlife health arena, there's been recent reports of multiple mortalities in Eurasian collared doves in Elko and Las Vegas. Wildlife health staff are working with regional diversity staff to get samples sent out to the USGS National Wildlife Health Center. In 2013, they confirmed an outbreak in Las Vegas of pigeon. It's a virus. It's a big, long word that I don't know. So, some pigeon virus, which has been documented in Eurasian collared dove and native dove species in other western states. Concerns that it may spill over to our native dove species exist. So it's an emerging infectious disease and an introduced and invasive dove species. Wildlife health specialists continue to partner with diversity staff and the Fish and Wildlife Service on preparation for desert tortoise sterilization workshops that are going to be held August 26th and 27th in Las Vegas. Also, wildlife health specialists have been doing surgical implantation of radio transmitters in speckled rattlesnakes. Lastly, necropsies were performed on 3 mountain goat kids that died of pneumonia. These animals were identified and collected as part of the collaborative research project between Endow, Iowa State University, and Washington State University, the respiratory pathogens and kid survival of mountain goats after a pneumonia die-off in bighorn sheep up in the Rubies and East Humboldts, and we'll certainly keep you apprised of the results as they become available. And Patrick has something to add.
I just had one thing I think you'll find interesting that I forgot to cover under budgets, the status of our capital improvement project requests. We have a hearing on the 26th before the Public Works Board to consider our projects. Currently, our projects that are in that request in priority order, our number 1 priority is the Overton WMA office and storage building. We had a leased trailer that burned down, I think last December. The state has been negotiating with the vendor of that building for months now, and they can't come to an agreement on terms, and our staff out there are working out of a travel trailer. So we made that our top priority. We offered to throw about 60% of the cost for that building to use wildlife restoration grant funds, and we think that'll have a very good chance of being approved by the Public Works Board. We were told by Public Works officials that there is very little additional bonding capacity that they project would be available for Public Works, so they think the estate's Public Works request will be pretty slimmed down. The CIP request. Last session, they did mostly maintenance, life safety issues, and not a whole lot of new construction, so we don't expect a lot out of it. But I think we stand a good chance with Overton. Our second priority is Las Vegas office HVAC replacement. It's an age system, has a lot of maintenance issues. That's small enough that we might be able to get that one through. Third priority is the Ely office addition and storage for Ely. We've added staff in Ely, and we don't have enough space for them. The building was constructed with, putting an addition on it when it was originally created, so it was kind of intended to be added onto. I don't know. This would be straight CIP money. We can't throw any federal grants at that because it's just sort of a regular office. I don't know how good a chance that stands. And the fourth priority is the Las Vegas multi-agency facility that would house us and DCNR. That's been on the books for a very long time for planning, and I don't think it's got a prayer's chance. It's expensive. It's like a $20 million building, and given the amount of money that's neither us or DCNR hasn't ranked very high, but we're hopeful for Overton. That's all.
Okay, is there any questions? With as thorough as that was, I doubt there's any questions. Thank you for that. We'll move on to agenda item 9G, litigation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The litigation report is in your packet. I don't think it's changed much from the one at the Tonopah meeting, but if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer.
Any questions on the litigation report? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 10, Nevada Department of Wildlife project updates. Secretary Wasley.
Well, as you'll recall, in Tonopah, we took advantage of the opportunity being near some research down there to have somebody come in and provide us an update. And we had some discussion about the value of, as the commission meeting moves around, trying to take advantage of things that were not only relevant to the agenda, but also geographically relevant, to try to provide the commission and county advisory board members the opportunity to have updates on some of the department activities. So today we have a couple presenters to discuss two different issues. One is the wood duck research that's been ongoing out here for quite some time. The main issue on our agenda today is season and bag limits for waterfowl, so it's relevant not only on the agenda but also geographically. So we'll have a presentation from a graduate student on that project, and then following him we'll get an update on some of the mule deer research, although it's not necessarily relevant geographically or on the agenda. There was an expressed desire by some members of the commission to get an update on that. So certainly it's something I'd like to try to continue to do, and if there's interest by county advisory board members or commissioners to get updates on ongoing work or projects, or if it's relevant to the agenda or geographic location of the meeting, we'd be more than happy to accommodate your desires. So with that, I guess I'd like to turn it over to for the wood duck update. I'm sorry, but I don't have a bio or anything for you, so hopefully you can introduce yourself and this. And
I'm Ben Settinger with the University of Nevada, Reno. I'll give you a quick update, hopefully today, on the Fallon Wood Duck project. So this is the 12th year of the project. It's the 9th year we've received funding. Today I'll talk a little bit about our continued monitoring of wood ducks, some of our public outreach in the classrooms and with citizens. Talk a little bit about the harvest experiment, and then some new directions that we're looking at taking the project. So our long-term monitoring, there's sort of two parts. Nesting is the first half. We started in 2003. This is a purely volunteer effort with 45 nest boxes, sort of modeled after California Waterfowl Association's nest box program. It was an excuse to get out on the weekends, and we grew from there. You can see this year we were monitoring 429 nest boxes. We had 80 nests this year. You can see we had a little bit of a spike there in 2009. We had 137 nests. There was a little bit of concern that our nests have been going down. They appear to have stabilized around 80 over the last 4 years, 80 give or take. They've seen the same effect in other nest box programs. You put up a lot of nest boxes, you get this sort of artificial increase, and then things stabilize. So we think we're getting into that more stable period with give or take 80 nests a year. The other side of the long-term monitoring is our intensive banding program. We band every month of the year. As far as I know, I think we're the only waterfowl project in the world that's able to band ducks every month of the year, and this allows us the opportunity to estimate population parameters at a much finer scale than most waterfowl studies. So we can estimate things like survival rate at the monthly scale instead of the more regular, I guess, annual scale like most duck programs. And this allows us to see during what time of the year survival rates are highest and what time of year they're lowest. I know this is a pretty busy slide, but the peach strip along the bottom of the table there has totals for each year. Number of new birds banded, the number of previously banded birds that were recaptured, and then the number of birds that have been resighted. And I guess just to highlight numbers to date on the far right side there, we've banded 5,200 and some wood ducks to date. Of those, we've captured 3,600, recaptured 3,600, and we've resighted 3,012. All the resight is, as you can see in the picture of the drake here at towards the bottom left, he's got that black plastic band on his leg, and we can read that band with a spotting scope from about 50 yards. This allows us to encounter individuals without actually having to catch them again once we've applied the band. Another big part of the program is just public outreach and education. Just highlighting our outreach in the last year. We typically give a lecture to the University of Nevada, Reno every fall, and then we bring the class out to Fallon to band wood ducks on the river, and then go to the marsh to check out the marsh banding. For a lot of these students, it's the first time they've ever held a wild animal, or at least a live wild animal for those that hunt. So it's a neat experience for students that are primarily in natural resources and wildlife to get to experience the research side of things. This last year we gave 2 lectures to the Churchill County High School, and we had them build some nest boxes for us. We gave a lecture to the AP Environment class at Reno High School. This has been an ongoing effort with them. We give a lecture, they build a bunch of nest boxes, and then they come to Fallon for a field trip to install their nest boxes. Last year we did this the installation on Super Bowl Sunday, which shows some of their interest, I guess. We gave 3 lectures to the Mineral County High School this last year, and then we had 2 different shop classes build some nest boxes for us. On the other side, just with the general public, the citizen science side of things, we gave a lecture to the Lahontan Audubon Society this last spring. We had our 5th annual wood duck event. This is otherwise known as the spaghetti feed. We switched things up a little bit this year. We had a luncheon. We invited folks to show up early in the morning. We took, I think, about 50 people out banding, then to go check some nest boxes. We came back to the convention center here in town. Some more people showed up. I think the total attendance was about 150 people for the informational meeting and fundraiser. We've been involved with guiding a tour for the Spring Wings Bird Festival for the last several years. I think this year was the Wild for Woodies tour. It was fun. And then we've also been involved with the Youth Day out at the Canvasback Gun Club for the last several years. We typically run a banding demonstration, and then we'll have a nest box building station for the kids. On to the harvest experiment, which is really where my interest lies. Just sort of a quick what and why. We're trying to induce some variation with this experiment in the harvest rate for wood ducks in Fallon. The idea is if we can get the harvest rate really low, at or below 5% for 2 years, and then get it really high for 2 years, at or above 20%, we can use this variation to start to examine relationships between harvest and sustainable population management. So how does duck hunting influence duck populations? Does it even have an effect? Right now we manage waterfowl harvest like it has an effect, but hopefully this experiment will give us some better insight. So we started in 2011 with the first restrictive or low treatment. We had the daily bag reduced to 1 wood duck per day, and we ended up with a 9% harvest rate, which was a little higher than we were hoping for. 2012, we went to the high harvest treatment, or the excessive treatment. The daily bag was increased to 7 wood ducks a day, with encouragement for hunters to really focus on wood ducks. And we came out with an 11% harvest rate, which was a little lower than we were hoping for. Last year, we did a lot of outreach. The group that hunts the river is fairly small. It's mostly private. We really reached out to those hunters that we no target wood ducks on the river and said, hey, can you leave them alone this year? Hopefully this will benefit us in the future. This is the last year we're going to ask you to leave them alone. Next year you can go nuts. We got a 3% harvest rate, which is exactly what we were looking for. This year, upcoming, we'll go back to 7 a day. They can make up for leaving them alone last year, and hopefully we'll get that harvest rate up around 20%. One thing we came up with was this band raffle to maybe provide some incentive for hunters to really go after the wood ducks. So this raffle, it's pretty straightforward. At our fundraiser every year, we instituted this last year. We announced it after the hunting season. Every band that a hunter brings in gets them a raffle ticket. Those go into a tumbler. We pull from the tumbler for 6 cash prizes. We did this at our fundraiser last year, and we had 400 reported bands brought in, 50 unreported bands, or bands that had been previously unreported. And this allows us, the ratio here allows us to estimate reporting rate, which is important to make corrections for our harvest rate estimates. So this will give us a little bit of some insight into what the reporting rates locally are. And then we announced we're going to do the same thing next year, but you have to bring in new bands. We're not going to accept any bands that you used last year, and hopefully this will provide some incentive to get that harvest rate up a little bit. And then this will be it. We're going to do this raffle one more time, and that'll be it. So some new directions. We've got an undergraduate working on her honors thesis, doing some mercury testing on, we started with wood duck feathers, and talking with some folks at USGS over in Dixon. They suggested maybe looking at some eggs. So we collected 60 eggs this last year that weren't going to hatch. They were either in dump nests or infertile, and we sent them to Dixon for testing. We haven't heard back on that yet. We've got about 7 years of genetic samples banked, well over 10,000 samples by this point, and we've just started coordinating with John Eady over at UC Davis. He's got a graduate student that's interested in looking at wood duck genetics, so I think they're going to analyze some of these samples for us. And then finally, we started installing 48 geolocators last fall. We put the last ones on nesting females this spring. We've downloaded 7 so far. I guess these geolocators are pretty neat. They're sort of an inexpensive tracking device, if you will. They don't transmit. It's just a clock and a light meter. And with the light curves that these build, we can calculate latitude and longitude to within about 100 miles. So we'll know if they're in Fallon or the Central Valley or up on the Snake River. We can also get at nesting activity, so whether or not females are in a nest box. We can estimate nest success from these. Breeding propensity, so how many females of the population are actually attempting to nest. It's something we have no idea right now, as well as temporary immigration. So we're hoping, we've downloaded 7 so far. We're hoping to get a lot of these back. The caveat is you got to catch the bird again to download the data. So our recapture rate is pretty high, so we should get well over half of these back, figure out where the birds are going, if they're leaving and coming back, and then get at some of the nesting behavior. And with that, thanks for your continued support and cooperation. I think we have a field trip tonight. We're going to leave the parking lot about 6:15. Chris would be here, but he's up having a blast in Nunavut, banding geese. So thank you.
Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments? All right. We got another presenter.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Cody, you ready?
Yep.
Figure how the pointer works first. Should be Wildlife Biology 101 right here. You ever use this, Tony? Goes forward pretty good. Suzanne, can you just restart it? Yeah, from the beginning.
For the record, Cody Schroeder, Nevada Department of Wildlife, mule deer staff specialist. Just want to start by thanking the commission for the opportunity to present these results of about 4 years of research. I started the research in collaboration with Tony back in 2011 as part of my PhD research at University of Nevada, Reno. And then I was, upon Tony leaving to become the director, I was hired by the department as the mule deer staff specialist. Also worked with several field biologists, Kayla McAdoo, Jeremy Lutz, Carl Lackey, Carrie Hubner, Dr. Kelly Stewart at UNR is my major professor, also Marcus Bloom at UNR, who's a master's student. I'm going to be talking about some of his work. Just to give a brief overview, so the primary focus of my research was the migration study. So I'm going to talk about the reason for the study, some of our research questions, collaring efforts so far, the status of the collaring efforts, some of our preliminary findings. In addition, we did a fawn survival analysis as part of the migration study. And then finally, I'm just going to kind of touch briefly on some of the mining-related projects we have going on in the Pequot Mountains, Bald Mountain Mine, and also Carlin Trend. So just to start off with some very basics in ecology, all organisms are constrained by life history traits that limit the allocation of energy to meet three primary goals. I mean, these are very basic: growing, surviving, and reproducing. But together, collectively, these make up an individual fitness. Now, most people think of fitness, the general public thinks of fitness as going to the gym, lifting weights, or running, things like that. But for a wild animal, it can mean more than just that. It can mean their ability to reproduce, to produce offspring, and how well their offspring do, subsequently. Collectively, that makes an individual fitness. As you can see in the picture, this nice adult buck has really good antler growth, a nice shiny coat, and good body condition, so we would count this as a fairly fit individual. So how that fits into what we're interested in wildlife management typically relates to demographic rates. So a group of individuals makes up a population, and we're usually interested in how that population is doing. Is it growing? Is it declining? Things like that. But to make up an individual fitness, many things impact an animal's ability to grow and reproduce. Things like behavior, energy balance, how much food they intake, how much they exert. And all these things are driven by forage and climate effects. So when we talk about behavior, what I'm going to focus on today specifically is migration behavior. It's a choice. You can think of migration as a choice. You either move or you don't move. Energy balance, to put it in a better context, you can think of as body condition. Usually the currency we're interested in wildlife is body fat. The fatter you are for a wild animal, typically the better you do. The more likely you're to survive, the more likely you are to produce viable offspring. This is a picture of our staff veterinarian, Dr. Perry Wolf, and she's got a portable ultrasound in her hand. She's measuring this adult doe that's on a table. She's measuring it for fetal rate. So she's, doing a preg test, but she's also not just determining if it's pregnant or not, but how many fetuses it has. That's her assistant, Chris Morris, there. And then on the far right is the student from UNR, Marcus Bloom, who I'll be talking about some of his work. So as many people are well aware of, populations of deer are not doing well across the western states. In Nevada, we've seen, fairly stagnant populations since about the last decade. We did have a peak in the 80s, precipitous decline. We had a
100-year weather event, 92, 93, and then since then it's been pretty much stagnant. I realize these data are slightly out of date, but really this trend hasn't changed much since. It's pretty much stagnant. Statewide population estimates hovers around about 100,000. But particularly more concerning is the observed spring-fawn ratios. If you look at the trend, it's a downward trend, which does not bode well for populations in the future. So there's been many hypothesized reasons for mule deer declines, and I've just broken them down into these three broad categories. I'm going to talk about the first one, habitat quality. So we can talk about a lot of different aspects of habitat, but in the slide here, if you look at the lower left-hand panel, that's one of the most obvious ones that's facing mule deer in Nevada. Type conversion from productive shrublands to invasive weeds such as cheatgrass. This is usually after fires is the worst case, but it doesn't have to be fires. It can also just be natural invasion. In the middle panel, we have instances of grazing. Now, this is not necessarily just livestock grazing. It can be natural grazing from wild ungulates as well. And this is an exclusionary fence where both cattle and elk and deer are excluded, and you can see the differences just inside and outside the fence there. And then on the top panel there, we can also have natural succession, which for mule deer is generally not a good thing. Mule deer are early successional stage species. They prefer new growth over old growth. We talk about land use changes. I'll start off in the top panel on this one. Here we have elk. They were introduced on some of our mule deer ranges. Now there's not equivocal evidence that elk outcompete mule deer or displace mule deer. However, it is another mouth on the rangeland along with other ungulates we have, both native and domestic. And collectively, they do have an impact, and there is some research showing competition for forage in some cases. But probably more troubling and more of an obvious displacement is the middle panel there, where we have urban development on our mule deer winter ranges. Now, this poses an obvious impact, although deer can somewhat thrive in urban areas. Anytime you're displacing large amounts of land like that, it's generally bad for mule deer. And then the bottom panel, we have land surface disturbances such as large-scale mining operations. Climate change. A recent estimate put out by a poll by climate scientists showed that about 98% of all climate scientists agree that global warming is in fact real and it's probably human caused. But what we're talking about for mule deer really is not long-term trends in climate, it's short-term trends. And we have seen these effects. In the last 3 years, we're looking at 3 years of drought. Now, droughts obviously aren't a new thing, but we have seen more serious weather events throughout the nation and here in Nevada. And probably the worst combination for deer is long-term drought followed by instances of severe weather such as spring rains, or worst case scenario is heavy snow. So for a mule deer, if you're deciding whether you should be migratory or not, this poses obvious challenges. If you have a few years where we have a dry winter and you think there's no need to migrate because things are glorious, all of a sudden we get hit with a 100-year weather event and you did not know how to migrate or didn't know where to go. And that's a problem. What has been these have all been pretty well studied. What has been less studied is the effects of these on migration and how these maybe interact with migration for mule deer. So the objectives of our research were twofold: to provide a quantitative analysis for the physiological and fitness-related costs of mule deer, and two, to determine if there's specific fitness costs for different sexes and age classes. So males versus females and juveniles versus adults. These are two basic things, but actually, there's been a lot less research on the male versus female survival aspect for mule deer. So we ask these basic questions. Does the migration strategy affect fitness in mule deer? And I'm going to talk about migration strategies a little bit more in the next few slides, but our first predictions were that residents, so non-migrators, it would be a poor strategy in severe winters. They'd be unable to navigate, their forage would be covered up, and obviously the energy costs of just navigating through snow be a poor strategy. Migrators would be a better strategy, but in a mild winter you might predict that the opposite would be true. And we also asked, does sex and body condition influence survival in mule deer? Now, there's been some evidence that male survival is lower, not just hunting, obvious sources such as hunting, but even outside the hunting season, due to things like dispersal or just the energy involved in fighting and defending females. So we predict male survival would be lower, female survival would be higher. And finally, that better conditioned animals would have higher survival. That one seems fairly obvious. So here's a brief overview of some of the study areas. So for the migration study, we had 3 primary areas denoted on here in the map. Carson-Tahoe Basin, Area 19. The Simpson Park Mountains, primarily in Area 15, although it did spill over slightly in some of the other hunt units. And then finally the Ruby Mountains, primarily in Area 10. And then we also had our mining study areas in the Carlin Trend and the Pequot Mountains. Bald Mountain, and I'm just lumping that in with the Ruby Mountains since it's essentially the same deer herd. Now these study areas, the 3 migration study areas, were picked because they were thought to sort of represent 3 diverse kind of habitat types throughout Nevada. And although they may not be indicative of every hunt unit, they do represent fairly different climate regimes and ecotypes. So this is just an overview of the collaring efforts we've done. We got year on the columns there and the different study areas. I don't expect you to pay attention to all the details there, but just the important one to consider there is the grand total. So we've collared 780 deer since 2011 total. 465 VHF collars and 315 GPS collars. Now a lot of these are fawn collars, which are not really designed to be long-term. In fact, the male fawns, which I'll talk about, are designed to fall off after a year. So we don't have that many currently on air, and we also have, obviously, natural mortality. So we're currently monitoring about 300 animals across the state. So here's just a little kind of brief on the different collar types. So we wanted to collar all the possible sex and age classes. So we had to catch fawns. Fawns, as you know, a mule deer, you can't determine sex till you have them in hand, so we caught a variety of males and females. The collar there you see on the right is designed for buck fawns. It's expandable. It has stitching on the left-hand side there that as the animal grows, the stitches loosen up and enables the animal to grow and not choke the animal. Eventually, though, on the top, it'll fall off. That's just plain old cotton thread there, and the sun bleaches it and it wears out, and then the collar falls off. They're designed to last about 1.5 years. So we also put collars on adult bucks, in which case we had a whole different beast to deal with in terms of collar design. When we looked around, there really wasn't an adequate